Hi guys. Okay, I'm going to be showing a couple of different painting techniques here. The first one's going to be the opaque technique, which basically means you have what's called full coverage. You cannot see any background whatsoever. The second technique is going to be called transparent. That means you can see through it. So it'll be it's like a veil of color, a very light veil of color, and you'll be able to see the background through it. Now, the third one, I'm demonstrating a complementary color scheme. Okay, so we have two paint techniques and then we have one color scheme. The brushes I'm going to use are a filbert. Okay, it's just a mid-size filbert, and I'm going to be using my number 4 round. The first color I'm going to use is going to be green. I'm in the mood for metallics, so I thought I'm going to use some metallic paint. So this is metallic green, and I'm going to paint this particular pair in metallic green. And again, because it is opaque, I'm going to give full coverage. And because it's metallic, it might take me more than one coat. I'll just push this around. This is why I like a filbert. It has a bit of a curve to it, so you can get into these kind of areas, like at the top of the pear. So really, the opaque color technique is usually used for color blocking, which means you fill in a background area before you add details to it. Oh, I forgot my other paintbrush, this round one I'm using. The paint is chipping off of the side of the handle, and I can't use it for that reason because it gets into my painting. So I've made a mental note not to buy the brushes with the wood sides anymore because they're just trouble. I find the paint just peels off, so I try to avoid them. All right, so I'm gonna keep painting this. So you can see it's getting more opaque. You cannot see any of the background at all. Just a nice metallic green. All right, so that demonstrates the opaque technique. Now, using the heavy body paint, which this is called because look at how it sticks up, right? So it's a hard body paint, heavy body. I don't know if it says that right on it. It does not. This is the paint I'm using, which has a high viscosity, which is really bright. It's a lovely paint. It's really nice when it dries. So I'm going to use this to make my transparent. So I'm just going to take a little chunk of it over here, and I'm going to add some water to it and make it as translucent as I can. Now, if you're using acrylic paint, which this just has metallic binders in it, this is how you're going to make it transparent, translucent. And if you're using watercolors, then you'll pick up some of the color from your watercolor puck, and then you'll put it on your palette and you'll add a lot of water to it, like what I'm doing here. If you have the watercolor tube, then you can just squeeze a little bit on here, just kind of the same way I have this little blob of acrylic paint, and then water it down again. So this one's quite easy. Look at, I can just probably do it in one stroke. And see how you can see the background through it. You can see the white of the background, and that way I know it's transparent. Now, if you're trying to put shadows in a transparent element in your picture, you need to wait for it to dry, unless you want to do wet on wet. So if I was to do wet on wet, I would make sure that my paper is wet like it is now, and then I would add the paint. Once it's dry, I don't think I'll be able to do wet on wet very well, because with wet on wet, usually what happens is your paper absorbs the water and it spreads all the water. Then you put the paint and the paint spreads. But once it dries, there's little pieces of plastic in the paint called polymers in acrylic paint, and it creates a bit of a shield. So I think the paint would just kind of sit on top of it. Anyways, that's your transparent one. Okay, so we'll just let this dry, and I'll put in a bit of a shade after, but I need to let it dry first. or I want to let it dry first. So now I'm going to move on to the complementary color scheme. And I have green and I have red. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use crimson red. Crimson's a good mixing red. Some reds don't mix very well, so you have to make sure it's a good mixing red. The way you'll know is if you try to make a purple. If the purple doesn't work, it's not a good mixing red. If the purple comes out great, then you know it's a great color. Crimson usually works great. I usually have no problem with crimson. All right, so I'm going to paint this pear green as well, but I think I'm not going to use the metallic. Actually, I'm going to use a regular green paint right out of the tube. Okay. But I might mix just a little bit of metallic with it. Now, you don't have to do this step. This is just for myself. You know, when you paint something 5 times, you kind of like to have a little variety. All right. So I'm just going to put in this color. It's a little bit heavy. For this, it doesn't matter whether I go opaque or if I go transparent, because it's about the colors I'm using, not about the technique. Okay, so I have my green. I'm going to put some red in there, and it's going to make it kind of a different color. Look at that. I'm just lightly blending it in there, right into that wet paint. And I'm going to follow it up one side. So this would be my shadow side, which means my light source will be coming somewhere from the opposite. I'm going to make my touch just a little bit lighter. Just try to blend in this color a little bit. I'm going to dry it off a little bit. I'm not going to rinse it. I'm just drying off the paint off my brush, just so I can just stipple it just a little bit. Just want to make a little bit of texture here. And then I'll let this dry and I will come back and revisit it again. Okay, just let that dry a little bit. Now for fun, I'm going to paint in some of these leaves here. Now this I'm just doing for my own pleasure while I wait for the paint to dry. And it's also good just to practice your paint strokes. If you want your paint to go on smooth, after you put down your initial coat, just kind of lightly brush it away. And it gives a nice smooth surface. I'm going to blend this color in just a little bit better into this pear. And the paper you use makes a big difference as well. Now this is my sketchbook, and sketchbook paper tends to be kind of multi-purpose. It takes the paint, not the best, but it will. You know, I've done some pretty good paintings on sketchbook paper. So now I want to make some brown. I'm just going to show you how to make the brown. It looks very much like that, and that's pretty much what I'm doing. Is I'm going to mix my red with some of that green. Just contaminated my green, but that's okay. And this is going to give me So like brown. If I was to put a bit of yellow in there, it would really make it brown. Just put a bit more green, it should do it. So this gives you kind of a warm shade of brown, almost like a burnt umber, I want to say. But once it's dry, once you paint it with other things, like around other things, or use it in other things, like with shadows and just creating your shading, you cannot see the red and the green in it. It looks just like brown, especially when it dries, because it dries darker. So I'll show you. So I go into these twigs here. And I'm going to paint this. I think that was going to be a leaf, but I changed my mind at the last minute. And I'm just making these little twigs. But look at that. When you look at it, it's on its own. It looks like brown. It just made brown with just the red and the green. A little bit of water to my brush here. A little bit in my stem. Let's see, what else do we have brown? I'll just put all the brown in since I have it on my brush. Adding to all the stems. Let's paint a couple more of these leaves here. Now I'm just adding this part for visual interest. That's really all I'm going to use up my paint, quite honestly. But just watching, I find you just learn these techniques. And it can be quite relaxing. Now this is just really a demo, so I'm not super worried about a lot of my lines and going over my pencil lines and stuff, I should say. Kind of interesting, I have to say. Let's just make this one a big leaf. And maybe this part should come from here. And there it is. We got one more leaf. And then I think I'm done. So again, now to get rid of this little line here, if I just very lightly, just kind of scoop it up, wipe it away, and then go back lightly again, and see, it just gives it a nice clean line. It's all in the pressure, you just have to use really light pressure. Okay. Let's get that stem. I find this brown is pretty impressive. We're just using red and green. I guess these are really good mixing colors. That's usually what it's indicating. And you get a really good mixing color, it means your primaries that you're using are good. All right, so I think I'm gonna stop there. So again, the very first one is your opaque painting technique, okay? Because it's completely solid, you cannot see any background, okay? I could probably give it another coat just to even make it just a little bit more solid. Then your second one is transparent, which means you can see the paper through it, which you can, otherwise it would just be a bit of a darker green. But because I can see the background through the paint, it tends to be very transparent. It's very light, okay? Just like this leaf here as well is transparent. And I know that because I can see the pencil under it. If it's opaque like this, I wouldn't see the pencil lines under it, okay? So with my opaque, I only go right up to the pencil line. A little bit there, you can see. So like I said, I could probably put another coat. But with the transparent, it's very light. Now, I move on to creating a color scheme. Okay, so this color scheme is called complementary, and complementary colors are opposite on the color wheel. So these colors that I used are red and green. So believe it or not, that is a red in there, and I'll just show you in my palette. So that's the red. I used a red crimson. I mixed it with my green, which is just like a pure green. I'm just trying to see if there's an actual another name for that green, but I don't think there is. It's just green. And I got this brown. Okay, so that's the color that I got. And then I used that color and I made the shading for the side of the pear. Now I could go in and I could add some white and do some tints and stuff, but I think I'm going to stop it there. The whole point was to demonstrate the opaque technique, the transparent technique, and the complementary color scheme, which I've done. Hope this is helpful.